Hey! Stop! Stop!
They sent 4 fake officers to our house all over flower colors. I swear I'm not exaggerating. I was literally standing on my own porch watching grown men in dollar store uniforms attempt to lecture my wife about HOA violations, while she calmly replied, "We're not even part of your HOA. And you think that would be the end of it, right?" Wrong. That was just the opening act. Suddenly, it felt like someone had flipped a switch and declared war on us. Threats, forged papers, weird cars prowling our street. Something was seriously off. Comment if you've ever run into a power-hungry HOA president who acts like they're above the law. I had just finished fixing Mrs. Peterson's water heater when I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday evening. The wrench was still in my hand when I saw them on my porch like they owned it. 4 men in what looked like police uniforms, but something was off immediately. Their shoes didn't match at all. 2 had sneakers, 1 wore work boots, and the 4th was actually in flip-flops with his official uniform. I mean, seriously, real officers don't show up to official business in beach shoes. The scene looked more like a community theater play where half the cast forgot their costumes. "We need to speak with Sophia Hayes regarding HOA compliance violations," the tallest one said, as I approached my front steps. His badge was shiny and pristine, no scratches, more like a county fair trophy than a symbol of authority. I froze, staring at him. My wife. What could she possibly have violated? The question slipped out, sharper than intended. But honestly, what kind of HOA infraction? Warrants for police officers? That felt like extreme overkill for someone who keeps your garden tidy and pays bills on time. The leader pulled out a folder of papers that looked straight off a printer. No coffee stains, no frayed edges, nothing that suggested any official process. They need to sign a corrected compliance agreement or face immediate legal action, he read, glancing nervously at the pages like a kid afraid to forget his lines. His eyes darted constantly down to the folder. "A ma'am signed an agreement during a recent boundary expansion," he said, stumbling over the word boundary as if he'd never said it before. I noticed their radios looked like toys. Real. Police radios are bulky, crackling constantly with dispatch communication. These were tiny plastic things, completely silent. One guy kept pressing the button like it might magically work, but nothing came out, not even static. I started pulling out my phone because this entire situation was spiraling into absurdity. "Can you show me the HOA document with my wife's actual signature?" I asked, already knowing they couldn't produce anything real, the 4 of them. Exchanged worried glances, clearly unprepared for this question, which told me all I needed to know about their investigative skills. Before they could fumble through another scripted reply, Sophia appeared at the door. She'd been at the kitchen table going through old papers when this circus started. She looked at their documents, scanned the printed garbage, and then calmly stared at them with that expression she gets when she knows something no one else does. The same look she gives me when I can't find my keys, and they're sitting right on the counter. "We're not even in your HOA," she said in the same tone someone might use to state the sky is blue. I turned to her like she'd dropped a nuclear bomb in our living room. The officers immediately began stammering. "Ma'am, according to our records," the leader started, but Sophia interrupted with a slight shake of her head. Her voice remained perfectly calm as she delivered information clearly not in their script. "Your records are wrong. We never joined, never signed anything, and this isn't HOA property." Her calm delivery left the 4 of them shifting nervously on the porch like they were sinking into quicksand. Panic crept across their faces as they realized their rehearsed performance had completely collapsed. Looking back, I should have known then that my wife held information that would unravel the entire situation. I raised my phone and began recording, making sure to capture clear shots of their flimsy badges and mismatched uniforms. The video would perfectly document every detail of their amateur hour performance. "Since you can't produce legitimate paperwork with my wife's actual signature, I'm calling 911, I announced, putting the call on speaker so they could hear the real dispatcher. The transformation was instant and almost comical. 4 grown men who had been trying to intimidate us suddenly looked like teenagers caught sneaking out past curfew. Their air of confident authority collapsed the instant a real police dispatcher's voice came through my phone. The leader mumbled something into his toy radio while they retreated from our doorstep. "Miranda, the wife knows something," I heard him whisper into the plastic device as they edged toward a beat-up sedan parked down the street. I couldn't help but notice the irony. Their worthless prop finally served a purpose, if only for spreading panic. I made sure to capture the license plate on video before they sped away like fugitives, which in hindsight they probably were. The entire encounter lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like surviving a bizarre home invasion orchestrated by the worst actors imaginable. My doorbell camera recorded everything, from the moment they stepped onto our porch to their frantic dash into the getaway car. Later that night, reviewing the footage, you could clearly see the pristine new badges, the mismatched footwear, and most importantly, Sophia's unwavering denial that we had any involvement with their HOA. The video was clear enough to capture the terror in their eyes when she uttered those 7 simple words that apparently held enough truth to make 4 fake officers scatter. That doorbell footage became undeniable proof. This wasn't mere harassment, it was deliberate criminal activity. What I didn't know was what my wife had that scared them so badly, or why they'd specifically targeted her instead of me. What I did realize was that this felt like the start of something far larger than a simple case of mistaken identity. The morning after the fake cop incident, Miranda Cross's campaign of escalation began. For 10 years, she had served as HOA president, a woman whose clipboard seemed fused to her hand. I had always assumed her obsession with rules was just extreme diligence, but now I could see the underlying malice. She had a way of scanning people, eyes flicking from a face to some perceived flaw in their property. That same cold, scrutinizing look she had given me paused over my roses before snapping back. "Still haven't trimmed those down, huh?" "Ha. Regulations state no growth beyond 30 inches from the curb," she said. Her tone was sharp, but there was a personal satisfaction to it, an almost vindictive pleasure that I now recognized went beyond mere aesthetics. I realized then that she hadn't been just enforcing rules, she had been stockpiling ammunition. Her campaign began with a thick envelope in our mailbox labeled Notice of Property Incorporation. The letterhead looked official and costly, a professional forgery meant to intimidate. It claimed a recent surveyor error had been corrected, placing our property under HOA jurisdiction. I read it twice, my mind racing, looking for any record of us agreeing to join. There was none, of course, but the document's polished fonts and convincing seals could easily fool someone less skeptical. Miranda clearly understood that most people accept the authority of an official-looking document without question. She was counting on that ignorance. 10 days later, like clockwork, another envelope arrived, stamped in red letters, violation notice. According to it, Sophia's rose garden violated community standards, supposedly requiring approval for flower. "Colors," I laughed out loud, probably not the reaction Miranda had anticipated. The roses, planted 2 years prior, were vibrant red and pink along our fence. The idea that anyone needed permission to plant flowers was absurd, but Miranda's actions were clearly planned. Her harassment followed a meticulous timeline rather than spontaneous enforcement. That night, a single black rose appeared on our mailbox. No note, no one in sight, just a dark flower taped to the lid. The message was clear. Someone was watching, aware of which flowers had sparked this conflict. I photographed the rose before discarding it, feeling that its timing immediately after the violation notice was too precise to be coincidence. That's when real fear crept in, the kind that raises the hairs on the back of your neck. This was no longer about rules. It was personal. The next day I ran into my neighbor Brandon at the grocery store. He had lived here for years but kept to himself. "Heard what's going on," he said quietly, looking uncomfortable, as if betraying a secret. She's trying to make an example out of you." When I asked for clarification, he confirmed that Miranda had created a private social media group to spread rumors about us. "She's calling you non-compliant new residents," he explained. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. The third notice arrived exactly 10 days after the second, keeping to Miranda's precise schedule. It warned of a $500 fine for unauthorized landscaping. Modifications threatening additional penalties if ignored, her methodical approach was almost impressive. She was crafting a paper trail that suggested she had followed proper procedure, even though her authority was entirely fabricated. The entire situation was beginning to resemble an elaborate extortion scheme designed to squeeze money from those unwilling to fight legal battles. On the 30th day, Miranda showed up at our front door with a small team of 3 others, all carrying cameras and documents. She introduced herself with a practiced air of authority that demanded instant obedience. They announced their purpose, documenting violations before taking any enforcement action. I watched as Miranda directed her team to photograph Sophia's garden, treating it like evidence for a criminal case. Mrs. Hayes needs to understand the community standards, Miranda said, pointing out particular flowers that supposedly broke rules I had never even heard of. The way she emphasized Mrs. Hayes made it clear this was about Sophia, not me. That's when things got interesting. I pulled out my phone and began recording their little photo session. Miranda's composure wavered immediately. She kept sneaking glances at my phone, her confident act starting to crack. "Do you have permission to record this?" she asked, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "This is my property," I replied evenly. "I don't need permission to record what happens here." She didn't like that response. Her barely contained anger began to surface as she struggled to regain control over a situation slipping out of her meticulously planned script. The tension escalated when I challenged her authority over property we had never agreed to include in her organization. Miranda's face flushed red as she insisted the boundary correction was legitimate and legally binding. "The county has corrected the survey error," she said, with the confidence of someone expecting unquestioned belief. But when I requested to see the county documentation, she claimed it was still being processed through official channels. Even her own team shifted uncomfortably as their leader's story unraveled in real time. At that moment, Deputy Grant Parker pulled into the driveway. He'd come in response to my call about the harassment campaign and to follow up on the fake police incident from the previous month. Suddenly, Miranda was caught in the middle of what appeared to be a coordinated intimidation effort, and now a real police officer was asking questions. The look on her face when she saw the uniform was priceless. Her cheeks drained of color, and her confident facade vanished instantly. Deputy Parker reviewed the doorbell footage from the fake cops incident while Miranda and her crew tried to appear innocent. "This is a serious criminal matter," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Impersonating police officers is a felony. We are treating this as an ongoing investigation." I watched Miranda's eyes widen as she realized her little scheme had escalated into real criminal scrutiny. Her attempt to wield fake authority had drawn the attention of genuine authority, and real authority doesn't take kindly to impersonation. The deputy photographed Miranda's violation notices and asked detailed questions about her claims. When she couldn't produce any paperwork proving we had ever agreed to join the HOA, his questioning became sharper. "Ma'am, do you have legal authority over these homeowners?" The tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Miranda started, speaking faster, making increasingly desperate claims, but she couldn't provide any official county records to support her story. I could practically see her realizing that her carefully built legal facade was crumbling under police scrutiny. She had chosen to escalate things legally, but watching her panic in front of Deputy Parker made me wonder if desperation might make her reckless enough to break additional laws. And yet, the way she looked at Sophia suggested this wasn't just about rules, it felt personal, and I couldn't understand why. Miranda's document fraud became undeniable the following week when she distributed what she called a corrected boundary survey to every house in the neighborhood. The timing seemed rushed, as if Deputy Parker's questions had rattled her more than she cared to admit. Each home received a glossy folder containing maps that appeared professionally produced, complete with official seals and technical language, designed to impress anyone who didn't examine them closely. The cover letter claimed the county recorder had discovered a historical mapping error and corrected it officially. Honestly, if I hadn't already suspected fraud, the presentation might have convinced me these documents were real. But closer inspection revealed obvious flaws. Incorrect fonts mixing modern typefaces with supposedly historical records, seals that appeared copied from multiple sources with inconsistent resolution, and most suspiciously, the corrected. Boundaries conveniently included our property while excluding homes belonging to people Miranda had never had issues with. What were the odds a historical mapping error would be so selective? I wasn't buying it, and I doubted anyone else would either after closer inspection. Sophia suggested we take the documents to the county recorder's office for verification, which seemed like the obvious next step. I expected a simple process that would reveal Miranda's fraud, but what we found was even more damning. The county clerk pulled out the original survey records and compared them to Miranda's version. "This is terrible Photoshop work," the surveyor remarked under proper lighting. "Look at the inconsistent shadow angles on these seals and the compression artifacts around the boundary lines. Apparently, professional document fraud requires skills Miranda simply didn't have." While I debated the technical details with the clerk, Sophia quietly sifted through the microfiche records in the corner of the office. She has a knack for finding the one detail that changes everything. When she called me over, she held a yellowed piece of paper with handwritten notes in the margins. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to delicate cursive from 60 years ago. The original deed included easement clauses I had never encountered before. Apparently, Sophia's grandmother had granted an access easement for farm road maintenance back when the land was still used for agriculture. Over time, the old farm road mentioned in the easement had transformed into what is now Willowbrook Drive, which meant that every vehicle entering Miranda's cherished HOA neighborhood was technically traveling across Hayes family property. The easement explicitly limited use to agricultural purposes and made it clear that any commercial development required both owner approval and compensation. I read that section 3 times before I truly grasped its significance. Sophia tapped my hand and pointed to another passage in the deed, her eyes shining with that satisfied spark she always gets when she cracks a puzzle. "They need our permission for any commercial development," she whispered. If Miranda was quietly negotiating with developers to sell rights for community access, she was essentially trying to sell something she didn't legally own. The Hayes family had never authorized commercial use of our easement, and we certainly hadn't received any payment for the extra traffic brought by residential development. The fake cops had been so intent on getting Sophia to sign documents, because this 60-year-old deed was central to their entire scheme. The legal ramifications were enormous. Every resident in Miranda's HOA relied on our family's right-of-way to reach their homes, yet the easement only covered agricultural activity. Residential use might have been a gray area, but commercial ventures definitely required explicit consent. If Miranda was holding meetings with developers about building projects or selling exclusive management rights for the community, she needed our approval first. Approval she had never sought, likely because she didn't even know the easement existed. Her whole plan hinged on controlling access to a road that legally belonged to someone else. The county clerk made copies of the original deed and easement paperwork while Sophia and I tried to absorb the revelation. "Ma'am, you'll want to consult a property attorney about this," he advised, signaling that we had stumbled onto something significant. Unauthorized commercial use of an agricultural easement can carry heavy penalties, particularly if development or sales activity occurred without consent. I thanked him for the guidance, but my mind was still spinning at the idea that we technically owned the road Miranda's entire neighborhood depended on. As we walked back to the car, Sophia admitted she had suspected something along these lines, ever since the fake cops had mentioned expanding boundaries. "I've been digging into this since that night," she confessed, which explained her calm demeanor during their visit. When they specifically targeted me, she realized there was something about our property they wanted to hide. Her strategic foresight impressed me, but it also highlighted just how dangerous things could get if Miranda was desperate enough to send criminals to our home. The fake cops weren't random harassment. They were a targeted attempt to stop exactly the kind of discovery we had just made. The drive home gave us time to discuss next steps, but one central question kept returning. If we owned the easement that allowed access to dozens of homes, what were we supposed to do with that information? Cutting off access seemed extreme, yet Miranda had already escalated to criminal behavior to try to control us. Her violation notices and fake police stunts showed she was willing to break serious laws to maintain dominance over the neighborhood. Now that we knew she might be trying to sell access rights that belonged to us, the situation had grown far beyond ordinary HOA harassment. Sophia reminded me that we owned the main road, but I wondered if we had the courage to enforce that claim. Miranda's reaction to our county visit was rapid and vicious. Within 48 hours, she had launched a social media campaign aimed at turning the entire neighborhood against us. She created a private group called Maintaining Community Standards and invited every resident except us, a fact I only learned from our neighbor Brandon during a chance encounter at the grocery store. According to him, Miranda was posting warnings about non-compliant new residents who were allegedly causing legal issues for everyone. The irony that she was calling us new residents when we had lived there longer than half the HOA wasn't lost. On me, the social media effort worked exactly as she intended. Formerly friendly neighbors started avoiding us at the store, crossing streets when they saw us coming, and generally treating us as if we carried a contagious disease. Mrs. Rodriguez, who used to wave from her garden, ducked back inside whenever. Our car passed. The Johnsons stopped letting their kids play outside when we walked by. It felt like we had been labeled neighborhood pariahs based on whatever lies Miranda spread in her exclusive group. I have to admit the social isolation stung more than I expected, but Miranda wasn't satisfied with just turning the neighborhood against us. 3 days after launching the social media campaign, the fake cops returned with a more elaborate performance. This time they staged what appeared to be official surveillance outside our house, complete with a tripod and clipboards, to make it seem like a legitimate investigation. Their act was more convincing than before, but I recognized the same mismatched shoes and toy radios. The fake officers made a point of questioning neighbors about Sophia Hayes' attitude toward community rules and whether anyone had observed ongoing violations of neighborhood standards. From my window, I watched them interrogate Mrs. Chen, scribbling notes on clipboards as if gathering evidence for a criminal case. The entire display was designed to make it look like Sophia was under official investigation, giving neighbors a reason to avoid us. Miranda had clearly learned from her earlier failures and was attempting a more sophisticated approach to intimidate and isolate us. The timing of Deputy Parker's follow-up visit could not have been more perfect or more disastrous for Miranda. He had scheduled an appointment to discuss the criminal impersonation case and collect additional evidence. When he arrived and saw 3 men in police uniforms conducting unauthorized surveillance, his response was immediate and authoritative. "Sir, step away from the vehicle and keep your hands visible," he ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority of a seasoned law enforcement officer. The shift from theatrical power to genuine submission was instant. Deputy Parker called for backup while maintaining control over the imposters. His professionalism was impressive. "We've got repeat offenders impersonating law enforcement," he radioed, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived, and suddenly our normally quiet street resembled a crime scene. Neighbors began stepping outside to see what was happening. The public arrest played out like a scene from a procedural, complete with handcuffs and Miranda warnings. Brandon Pierce, who normally avoided neighborhood drama, watched from his porch, jaw dropped. "I thought they were real cops this time, too," he later told me, perfectly capturing how convincing the second operation had been. I didn't know whether to laugh or keep filming, so I did both, making sure to document everything for potential court use. The doorbell camera was recording automatically, but I wanted multiple angles of Miranda's scheme collapsing in daylight. Seeing 3 men in handcuffs being loaded into patrol cars sent a clear message to every neighbor who had been avoiding us due to her social media posts. The same people who treated us like criminals were now witnessing actual criminals being arrested for targeting our family. The social media group that had been buzzing nonstop with alerts about our alleged non-compliance went eerily quiet, as if someone had hit a switch and silenced the entire conversation. People began to wonder what else Miranda might have been dishonest about if she could collude with individuals pretending to be law enforcement. But the community's reaction created an unexpected dilemma for me. As I watched the handcuffed men being led away, Sophia's perspective began to shift. "Are we causing this?" she asked, nodding toward the patrol cars and the neighbors who had gathered. "Should we just sign their papers and make this disappear?" For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I heard doubt creeping into her voice. The self-assurance that had carried her through the fake officer's initial visit and the county research was faltering under the weight of seeing people arrested over our property dispute. I understood her worry, but I also knew we hadn't broken any laws. They were the ones committing crimes, not us, I reminded her, though I could see the reasoning behind her unease. 3 people were ending up in jail because Miranda had escalated a property disagreement into criminal activity. If we had signed the documents they demanded from the start, none of this would have happened. But signing fraudulent paperwork wasn't right either, and giving in now would only encourage Miranda to target others with similar schemes. Seeing Sophia question our decisions for the first time made me wonder if we were out of our depth. The arrests marked a turning point in how the neighborhood viewed our situation, but they also raised the stakes significantly. Miranda's social media campaign had completely backfired, and her fake police tactic had led to actual arrests that she would now have to explain to everyone she'd deceived. Brandon began recording everything on his phone, which suggested he was starting to see that Miranda's accusations didn't match what was really happening. However, the escalation of criminal charges also meant Miranda might grow increasingly. Desperate to resolve the situation before her reputation was irreparably damaged, the whole neighborhood was watching, and I couldn't tell if Sophia was ready for what came next. Later that evening, an anonymous threat escalated things beyond anything we had faced so far. A note was slipped under our door, the handwriting shaky, as if hurried or penned by someone nervous. The development contracts are worth millions. Back down or face consequences. The threat was ambiguous enough to avoid criminal liability, but precise enough to indicate that our easement discovery had disrupted something far larger than neighborhood disputes. Someone was clearly panicked about those development contracts, and I began to realize our small deed might be more valuable than we'd imagined. The following week, Miranda's lawyer filed an emergency restraining order against us, a move that seemed like a desperate attempt to regain control through the courts. The filing claimed we were interfering with legitimate HOA operations and community safety by refusing to follow established neighborhood regulations. Reading the documents, it was clear Miranda's strategy was to portray us as the instigators disrupting a peaceful community. The restraining order sought a court mandate requiring us to comply with all HOA rules and stop what they called our harassment of community officials. I couldn't believe someone was asking a judge to force us into an organization we had never agreed to join. The filing included additional claims that revealed Miranda's desperation. According to her lawyer, Daniel and Sophia Hayes were creating a dangerous precedent of noncompliance, threatening the stability of established community governance. The documents painted us as troublemakers, refusing to respect legitimate authority, and encouraging other residents to question HOA regulations. What stood out most was the repeated focus on community safety and proper access procedures. Miranda's concern about access aligned perfectly with what we had discovered regarding the easement. Sophia's response was both strategic and timely. Instead of immediately hiring a lawyer to fight the restraining order head-on, she leveraged our easement rights proactively. She contacted a property law expert who confirmed our easement documentation was valid and outlined specific legal options to address unauthorized commercial use of an agricultural right-of-way. The lawyer explained that if commercial activity exceeded agricultural use without the owner's consent, the easement could be restricted for a safety review. Miranda's developer meetings and community management contracts clearly counted as commercial use exceeding the easement's intended scope. Sophia's legal maneuver was simple in concept but devastatingly effective. She filed a countermotion with the county for an easement safety inspection, entirely legal and conducted with proper permits and mandatory notice periods. The county issued permit number 2024-1147 for a right-of-way maintenance assessment, with a 30-day notice that could not be challenged or delayed. Miranda's attempt to pressure us legally had backfired because we were now exercising legitimate property rights through proper channels. Sophia hired a licensed contractor to perform the safety assessment, which required temporary barriers along Willowbrook Drive while the inspection equipment was set up. Watching the crane lower the barriers felt like watching the stage being set for the neighborhood's most expensive performance. Signs were posted at both ends: private right-of-way temporary safety inspection, County Permit 2024-1047. the legal. Language was precise and airtight, leaving Miranda no grounds to claim we were acting illegally or without authorization. The immediate impact on the HOA community was exactly as expected. Blocking the main access road for safety reasons sent a clear and unavoidable message. School buses were unable to reach the elementary students living beyond the barricades, forcing parents to walk 3 blocks to an alternate entrance every morning and afternoon. Delivery trucks couldn't maneuver the tight side streets either, so packages began accumulating at the community mailbox hub. 30 families found themselves effectively cut off by construction equipment, unable to reach work without adding an extra hour to their commutes along side streets that weren't built to handle that traffic. Within 2 hours of the barriers going up, Miranda was on my phone, yelling. I ended up playing her voicemail 3 times just to set her panicked voice as my new ringtone. "You can't block community access over personal disputes," she screamed, ironic since she had spent weeks trying to assert control over our property. "People can't get to work. Kids can't get to school. This is illegal." But in reality, it wasn't illegal. It was a fully permitted safety inspection on a privately owned right-of-way that just happened to serve her community. The timing was deliberate, but the legality was indisputable. The community's reaction was predictable. Some residents were initially frustrated at us for disrupting their routines. But one father had a moment of clarity when explaining to his kids why the school bus no longer picked them up. "Wait, this road isn't public? Miranda never mentioned that?" His confusion echoed the majority of the community, who had assumed Willowbrook Drive was public infrastructure maintained by the city or county. Learning that their primary access road was actually private property owned by the family, Miranda had been harassing completely reframed the dispute in their eyes. Meanwhile, the secondary entrance quickly became a nightmare. Daily commutes stretched. By 2 hours, as cars backed up for blocks on residential streets, incapable of handling the sudden traffic surge, parents missed work trying to pick up kids at the alternate school drop-off. Emergency vehicles were forced to reroute through streets unsuitable for ambulances or fire trucks. Within a week, the full community was feeling the consequences of losing access to a road they had always assumed was public, but was really our family's private right-of-way. Watching this unfold began to affect Sophia more than I anticipated. "What if we're hurting innocent people?" she asked one evening, watching families walk past our house with groceries they had to carry from blocks away. These families hadn't caused the situation. Miranda did. Sophia's empathy for the community was commendable, but I worried that giving ground now would only embolden Miranda to escalate her harassment and fraud. I reminded Sophia that Miranda created the problem, not us, though I understood her concern. About collateral harm to uninvolved families. The tension between us grew in ways I hadn't expected. Daniel wanted to hold firm and make Miranda face the consequences of her actions, while Sophia worried about the wider community impact of our legal strategies. We agreed Miranda needed to be stopped, but disagreed on how far to go in defending our rights when others were suffering. Neither of us was wrong, but the disagreement added stress to our marriage that Miranda's harassment had never managed to achieve. Sometimes fighting for principle comes with personal costs that are even harder to manage than the original problem. Then an anonymous threat pushed the situation further. A note appeared under our door, written in shaky handwriting as if rushed, or made by someone extremely anxious. "The development contracts are worth millions. Back down or face consequences." The threat was vague enough to avoid criminal liability, but clear enough to indicate that our easement discovery had disrupted far more than local HOA politics. Whoever wrote it clearly understood the financial stakes of our property rights, suggesting the matter extended beyond Miranda's personal vendettas. Legally, though, the situation remained in our favor. The Hayes family had the absolute right to inspect our easement, particularly given concerns about commercial development that exceeded the original agricultural terms. The county permit was valid, the contractor licensed, and the safety inspection proceeding according to proper procedures. Miranda could complain all she wanted, but she had no grounds to challenge our control over access to our own property. Still, the anonymous note hinted that someone was panicking about development contracts, and that the financial stakes were higher than we had realized. What began as HOA harassment now felt genuinely dangerous. The emergency court hearing was scheduled 3 weeks after our blockade began, giving both sides time to prepare. I expected Miranda to show up with basic HOA paperwork and perhaps a neighborhood petition, but she arrived with a lawyer and a thick folder, clearly treating. This is more than a simple property dispute. Her confidence returned to the same arrogant authority she had displayed with the initial violation notices, which made me wonder what evidence she believed she had. Her presentation was meticulously organized and whispered over instructions to her lawyer in a way that suggested she aimed for more than just the removal of our barriers. The evidence she presented was impressive in scope, but completely fraudulent. It included forged boundary surveys that appeared professional, fake HOA incorporation documents claiming our property was officially part of the community, and false assertions that the Hayes family had illegally blocked a public road, implying criminal conduct. The materials were polished enough to fool an uninformed observer, but the judge was sharp. This document lacks formal plat verification, Miss Delaney. Without that, your claim is speculative, the judge said. I glanced at Sophia and noticed, for the first time since we met, a hint of concern rather than calm. The judge clearly scrutinized the paperwork, catching inconsistencies Miranda's lawyer had hoped would go unnoticed. His request for original county survey records created a problem that no amount of forgery could solve. When pressed to provide genuine county documentation to support her boundary claims, Miranda's attorney began spinning excuses about administrative delays and processing issues. Your Honor, the county has been slow in issuing certified copies, he said, yet the judge's expression clearly conveyed her skepticism. The longer Miranda's side struggled to produce legitimate evidence, the more apparent it became that their entire case rested on fabricated materials. Then it was Sophia's turn to present. Her testimony was a masterclass in calm, factual delivery, a stark contrast to Miranda's frantic legal theatrics. She approached the witness stand carrying the original deed and easement records we had obtained from the county recorder's office, along with certified copies confirming their authenticity. Your Honor, these documents establish a 60-year agricultural easement that is now being exploited commercially without the owner's consent, she explained in the same steady tone she had used previously. The defendant has been utilizing our family's right-of-way for community access without compensation, and she is now attempting to sell those access rights to developers. The effect of Sophia's testimony was immediate. The judge examined our deed documentation with meticulous attention, asking pointed questions about the easement's terms and commercial restrictions, scrutiny that Miranda's forgeries had never endured. When Sophia clarified that Miranda's meetings with developers amounted to unauthorized commercial activity, the judge's questions became even more focused. Critical evidence surfaced during the court session, revealing Miranda's criminal conspiracy. The county surveyor who had reviewed Miranda's forged maps testified that the documents were blatantly falsified, containing technical inconsistencies that no trained professional would accept. He confirmed that no boundary corrections or survey revisions had ever been filed for our property, and that Miranda's maps included geographical impossibilities, proving they were entirely fabricated. His expert testimony destroyed the last shred of credibility Miranda's legal team might have retained. During a court recess, Brandon approached with a USB drive he carried as though it contained state secrets. "This is better than anything on cable TV," he said, grinning, clearly excited about what he had discovered. Bond plugged it in like he'd done it 100 times. "These are internal HOA emails. Look at the dates," he said. The correspondence revealed that Miranda had known she was acting outside her authority 6 months ago. The courtroom gallery erupted. The USB contained email threads between Miranda and Grandview Development detailing financial arrangements for managing community access. The emails documented payments to Miranda for unified neighborhood control services and contracts selling exclusive community management rights, specifically including the Hayes property. Reading them, I finally grasped the full scope of Miranda's plan. She stood abruptly, knocking over her water. "This is fabricated!" she shouted, her voice cracking. No one moved, not even the bailiff. The judge's interim ruling was everything we had hoped for and everything Miranda feared. After reviewing all the evidence, including the county surveyor's testimony and Brandon's USB files, she ordered a 30-day period to review evidence and investigate potential criminal fraud charges. She allowed the Hayes family to continue inspecting the easement, meaning the blockade would remain until the legal review was complete. Most importantly, she required Miranda to produce original incorporation documents proving that the Hayes family had consented to join the HOA, a document that did not exist since we had never agreed. Community support surged after neighbors witnessed the proceedings, quietly approaching us to share their experiences of Miranda's harassment. Brandon's USB contained Miranda's true plan, which was far larger than anyone had imagined. But when the judge banged the gavel, declaring a recess for verification, Sophia turned to me and said, "It's not over." She was right. Miranda remained unblinking, smiling. Brandon's USB held enough evidence to dismantle her entire operation, but it went beyond simple HOA corruption. The email threads revealed that Miranda had received $50,000 from Grandview Development over 6 months, disguised as community consultation fees for ill-defined services. Draft contracts showed her plan to sell exclusive community management rights, including our property, despite lacking legal authority. Meeting notes outlined efforts to eliminate non-compliant residents to create a unified development zone for a luxury resort project. Developer emails painted a picture of systematic manipulation, explaining Miranda's escalating desperation. Grandview Development needed full community compliance to proceed, which required neutralizing any property owners who might oppose commercial construction or demand compensation for easement use. Miranda's role was to enforce unified neighborhood management using any means necessary to ensure complete compliance. The fake cops, forged documents, and harassment campaigns weren't random acts of cruelty. They were calculated strategies to remove property rights that threatened a multi-million-dollar development deal. Photos on the USB depicted Miranda at luxury resort meetings, shaking hands with developers while reviewing architectural plans that included community access roads she did not own. The images showed her attending business dinners, signing preliminary contracts, and touring construction sites with developers who clearly regarded her as a key partner. Seeing these photos made it clear why she had acted with such confidence. She had promised developers she could deliver community-wide compliance, and our resistance was exposing her inability to do so. Brandon's secret recordings of recent HOA meetings captured Miranda admitting she was being paid to pressure residents into compliance. "We need to demonstrate strict enforcement to show developers that community standards are non-negotiable," she told the board during a confidential session. Her own words confirmed that HOA violations were being manufactured to serve developer interests, not actual community standards. The community meeting that took place after Brandon released the evidence was unlike anything our neighborhood had ever seen. 30 families filled the community center as news of the USB content spread, chairs groaning as residents rose to voice their anger. Parents who had been paying violation fines learned that their money had been funneled into Miranda's developer deals instead of improving the community. Elderly neighbors realized that the house painting projects they were forced into weren't about preserving property values for current residents, but about achieving visual uniformity that developers desired. A young father shared that Miranda had threatened to tow his car unless he voted for expanded HOA powers, which would have given her authority over homes like ours. Miranda's attempt to dominate the meeting spectacularly backfired when the community refused to let her speak over their testimonies. She shouted about maintaining community standards, but the voices of 30 outraged residents drowned her out, demanding answers about the developer payments. Her face drained of color as people asked pointed questions about where their HOA fees had gone. "It was for community improvements," she repeated, but no one believed her once they realized she had been taking money from outside developers to harass her own neighbors. When residents called for an immediate vote to remove Miranda from office, she frantically checked her phone and announced her resignation, effective immediately. But the crowd wanted more than her departure. They demanded accountability for the money she had stolen and the harassment she orchestrated. "Resignation doesn't erase criminal fraud," someone shouted from the back. The community had moved, past wanting new leadership. They were seeking justice for the abuses they suffered under Miranda's corrupt control. Brandon stood at the front, holding printed developer emails and reading excerpts that proved Miranda had been paid to target families like ours. Quote, The Hayes property presents the biggest obstacle to unified community management. We need creative solutions to force compliance or removal. Silence swept over the room as residents absorbed the fact that their HOA president had schemed to push families out of their homes for the benefit of outside developers. The betrayal was so total that even longtime supporters of Miranda were visibly enraged. Sophia's moment arrived when the crowd turned to hear our perspective. Standing calmly at the back with the manila folder that started it all, she spoke clearly. For 60 years, our family had allowed neighbors free access across our property. When that goodwill was met with harassment, criminal impersonation, and attempts to sell our property rights without our knowledge, everything changed. I wanted to speak up, but Sophia squeezed my hand, letting the community decide their response. Within hours of the meeting, the developers withdrew, showing how damaging the fraud investigation had become to Grandview Development's reputation. Once criminal conspiracy and document forgery became public, all contracts were canceled, and the developers issued statements distancing themselves from Miranda. Their luxury resort project collapsed overnight, eliminating the financial incentives that had driven Miranda's harassment campaign. Without developer support, Miranda's scheme lost both funding and purpose. Court reconvened the following week, expected to deliver a final ruling on our property dispute. The judge had spent the evidence review period examining Miranda's criminal activity and consulting legal experts on easement violations. Her expression upon entering suggested conclusions that would have major consequences. Miranda sat alone at the defendant's table, having lost both her lawyer and community support once the developer payments were revealed. She had risked everything on deception, and now it was time to pay. The judge's final ruling surpassed all expectations. After a full review of evidence, she addressed every facet of Miranda's fraud scheme. The court found that Miranda had engaged in systematic document fraud, criminal conspiracy, and unauthorized commercial use of private easement. She awarded us $40,000 for easement usage, $25,000 for legal fees and harassment damages, and $15,000 in punitive damages, totaling $80,000. Watching Miranda react to the $80,000 judgment was like seeing her world crumble in real time. She stared at the gavel in shock, probably calculating how much of the developer money she had already spent. Her face went pale as she realized that the $50,000 from Grandview Development wouldn't even cover half of what she now owed. The full weight of her deceit hit her as she grasped the legal and financial hole she had dug for herself. The court also immediately ended all HOA claims against our property. Defendants were permanently barred from asserting authority over Hayes family property. Within 2 months, Miranda faced financial ruin, forced to sell her house to cover the judgment, creating the ultimate irony of losing her own home while trying to steal ours. HOA insurance didn't cover criminal fraud, and she faced personal bankruptcy. The criminal investigation brought additional satisfaction, with the fake police officers facing state charges for impersonation and receiving community service and probation. Miranda herself faced investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of HOA funds, with potential jail time looming. The HOA lawyer underwent a professional ethics review for knowingly submitting fraudulent documents in court. Community healing began immediately after Miranda's removal. A special meeting was held to vote her out, and every hand went up like a synchronized morning exercise class. 28 votes to remove, 0 to keep. The interim board discovered she had diverted additional HOA funds to personal accounts, explaining her previously mysterious luxury lifestyle. The community voted to drastically reduce HOA powers, ending most of the rules Miranda had used to harass residents. Architectural approvals were now limited to major structural changes, ending scrutiny over flower gardens and paint colors that had fueled fraudulent violation notices. The new board issued a written apology to our family and every household. Harmed under Miranda's corrupt rule, no handshakes were offered, only a silence that cut deeper than shouting. Neighbors walked past our driveway without acknowledging us, which said enough. Vindication came through media coverage, restoring our reputation. The local newspaper headline read, "President's Fraud Scheme Exposed by Historical Property Deed, Highlighting Property Rights and Corrupt Leadership." The community newsletter used our experience as a case study on leadership failures. Our easement rights were finally recognized legally, removing previous barriers. Traffic on Willowbrook Drive returned to normal, with a small sign, "Private right-of-way, courtesy of the Hayes family." Children can play safely without HOA harassment. Brandon became a close family friend after his pivotal role in exposing Miranda's corruption. Other neighbors regularly expressed their gratitude for our courage in standing up to a leadership that masked tyranny as community service. Backyard barbecues returned, free from the anxiety of violation notices. The isolation Miranda had enforced vanished, replaced by genuine neighborly support. 2 months after the final court ruling, I was installing a new mailbox while Sophia tended to her rose garden, the very garden that had sparked this entire conflict. Brandon wandered over, holding a beer, watching kids dash through our family's right-of-way in the street. "You know what's ironic?" he said. "Miranda wasted so much energy trying to force everyone into her expanded HOA, she never checked who actually owned the road she was standing on." Surveying the now peaceful neighborhood, I could see just how drastically things had shifted since that first night with the fake cops at our door. No more threatening letters, no fraudulent schemes, no harassment aimed at my wife, just neighbors living as neighbors, free from arbitrary authority. Sophia had understood it from the start. I motioned to her, tending the roses Miranda had once used as a pretext for violation notices. "We're not even in your HOA," she had stated calmly, an undeniable legal fact that unraveled everything. Sophia joined us, brushing dirt from her hands. "These same roses that triggered Miranda's first notice are now blooming without interference," she said softly. "We never wanted a fight. But when criminals target your family and attempt to steal your property rights, sometimes you must defend what's yours." 3 weeks later, I watched a moving van pull up to Miranda's house. The HOA board lingered outside, silent, recording everything. Miranda emerged for the last time, carrying a single box while movers handled the rest. She glanced across at our house for a moment, perhaps to wave or speak, but instead shook her head and got into her car. The woman who had once wielded so much control over this neighborhood was leaving with nothing but debt and disgrace. I watched her drive away, traveling the same right-of-ways she had once tried to seize from us, likely for the final time. After her departure, the interim HOA board uncovered more fraud. She had been pocketing maintenance fees while billing residents for services never delivered. Robert from Lot 12 showed me a doctored deed used to fabricate HOA consent. Brandon estimated that 15 families had been coerced illegally through forged documents. The right-of-way Miranda attempted to control through fraud continued to serve the community as it had for 60 years, now legally recognized as our family's property. Cars passed through our easement daily without incident. The key difference: everyone understood this access was a courtesy granted by our family, not a right that could be sold to developers without permission. Sophia trimmed the roses last, not out of obligation, but because she wanted them to flourish unbothered. "Maybe next year," she said, "we'll plant thorns too. Sometimes the finest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting the truth and the law do the work while you sit back and watch the roses bloom in the garden that started it all." They tried to bury us under paperwork and lies. Instead, they buried themselves with no drama, no noise, just facts, sunlight, and a single, enduring good deed. The HOA never sent another letter. No more fake violations, no more patrols. Just silence, the kind that signals someone has finally learned their place. Yet one morning, shortly after the last moving truck left Miranda's house, our doorbell rang. Half expecting another threat or envelope, I opened it. Instead, there was a welcome basket, homemade cookies, a candle, and a tiny packet of rose seeds. No card, just a single handwritten note on yellow paper. "You were never part of us. Now we understand why." I stared at it for a long moment. Sophia didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Perhaps the real lesson is that when you are grounded, in truth, the land itself holds you. You don't need to fight for it. If you're still watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit the thanks button to help the channel grow. Stay vigilant, and watch your property lines.